Now, when we were defining a project, we used to see that the version of the project used to call as a snapshot, right? So let's try to understand first what is a snapshot and why is that we have been giving that as the name. So if you have not seen it, let me open the project. This was the project that we had. And if you see, the version that we gave was 1.0 snapshot. So what does the snapshot represents? Because by default, if you do not give any value, this will be the standard value. So what exactly is a snapshot? To understand that, now let's first understand what will happen if I use a version number. Now, whenever you say you are going to identify a project, you are basically going to give a machine, or particularly, let me say that in this way. Okay, so you have a project, and in that project, if you want to work, then only while the time you are going to do a release, that is when you have to go to the customer and give it to him, only that time you will be giving a version number to identify. So that way, only when a product is going to the market, you will be giving a version number attaching to it. But until then, we will be actually doing a development work where the files can be modified several times and the product can be built several times. So that is when we are trying to do a product or a build of a project, and before going it to the customer, we will not be giving it a version number. What will happen if I give a version number is, now let's say for each build that I'm doing, if I give a version number, then each of the jar files that I'm creating will be coming with the name of that version number, because the standard that we use in Maven is, what is that? We will be putting it as the project name hyphen version dot jar. So that way, now let's say you are creating a build of a project. Okay, let's say there is a project A gets built, and what will happen for that project, you will have a file created, that is the jar file created, and that will have some version number. Now let's say I call this version 1.0.jar, and then after some time, if I rebuild it again, then I have to increase the version number, then it will become 1.1.jar. Like this, every time if I do a build, I have to keep changing the number if I'm giving a version number to identify. The problem with these kind of things, what will happen is, on the other side, if you have a dependency of this project, now let's say there is a project called project B, and to create this, it has a dependent on the a.jar. So that way, now in this project, how is that you are going to tell among these files which one is it independently required? And every time if you are going to change this, then every time all the dependencies of the project has to be updated. So like this, if there are more than one project which is dependent on this particular a.jar, then for each one of them you have to specify the exact location on what jar it is and what you have to increment it. So that way it will not be good to give a version number for a project which is under development, because you cannot specify the dependency, and every time if you are trying to rebuild this, you will get a new file name, and correspondingly you have to update everywhere wherever it is dependent. So instead of using this version number incrementing or a specific version number, what we can do is, in Maven we will use a standard version number called a snapshot, which will be used for all the development project. Development means until you are going to do the release of that project, whatever development activity is happening, for that we simply create a version called snapshot, and this is how it is going to be. So now if I name this version as 1.0 snapshot, no matter how many times I rebuild, it is the same file it will be created, and I don't have to update this again and again because I have rebuilt. And also, anytime if I update it, the previous file will be overwritten with the same file. So these dependencies will also take the latest project. So such a kind of special version is what we call it a snapshot, where basically it indicates that you are working on a project which is still under the development activity. and only when you are going to release the project, you will be using a version number. So pretty much at the end, probably by next session, I'll be showing you how to do the release, and in that, what is that we have to do to update the version, and after updating the version, we'll be doing the release. But until then, whatever development activity we are supposed to do, where we might be building a project multiple times, and if it has a dependency, then it's always better to go ahead with the standard version name called as snapshot. Okay, so remember, a version is given only for a release. For any time other than that, we will be using the snapshot as the standard name.